Let's take a look at some of the latest situation of France's relocation of migrants from Calais camp to somewhere else in France. And I'm joined by Professor Thom Brooks from the UK. He's the head of the Durham Law School at Durham University. Professor Brooks, welcome to be with us. First of all, it's very important that we need to understand the point about why there has been previous cases in which the dismantling of the camp have not been success legally. Help us to understand more about that.
Well, I think that the main problem has been that Britain and France have been blaming each other for the camp. So the British have said that the people who are in Calais are migrants on French soil and a French problem. The French have said, well, they are on our soil, but they're here because of a particular special arrangement. And that's the special arrangement by the Eurotunnel connecting France and Britain, where the two countries agreed that people would enter across the boundary on the other side of the tunnel. Right. So you would enter Britain on the French side of the Eurotunnel. And so you have migrants on that side who are there. So they blamed each other for this problem and have been unwilling to do anything about it until now.
Huge numbers of migrants have been applying for asylum, but approval number so far has been very low, far lower than expected. 2015, for example, EU countries offered asylum to nearly 300,000. In the same year, more than 1 million migrants applied for asylum, though it's not necessarily going to be approved or have been approved. Let's take into some consideration of these lengthy process. If you look at the numbers over there on the screen, you will have some idea. So, Professor, let me ask you, after this, Professor Brooks, dismantling of the camp, the people are being moved to other parts of France, but will that mean the end of this long battle against camps? Will these people necessarily, legally, going to be settled down for their better?
Well, I think that it's a real problem for any government to make determinations about asylum for people who don't usually have paperwork. A lot of the people we're talking about, not all, but quite a few will not have all their paperworks, may not have their passports and so on. It can take a while to determine whether or not someone is who they say they are and leaving for certain reasons. Remember, just the fact that someone's in the camp doesn't mean that they have a reason to have asylum in the country. That asylum is something that has certain rules attached to it, and it can take some time to make a determination on this. Right. I think so. So there's a lot of work, and it can be quite a long delay to make determinations on whether or not anyone gets it or not.
Thank you very much, Professor Thom Brooks from Durham University. Thank you, really appreciate it. And now joining us for the discussion about the overall situation and where are these people heading for? Are they going to have a better future? We are having from Paris, Virginie Guiraudon. She is a research professor at the National Center for Scientific Research. In Berlin, we are having Josef Janning, senior fellow at the European Council for Foreign Relations. And finally in London, Iain Begg, professor research fellow at the European Institute at the London School of Economics, also associate fellow at Chatham House. Welcome to the three of you. First of all, is this really going to solve the problem, or rather going to create another camp somewhere else in Calais or some other towns in northern part of France? Let's go to Virginie.
Well, good afternoon. Well, this is the first time there's been such a big operation in Calais, but you are right to point out that one of the fundamental problems is the agreement between France and the UK, which means that actually the UK border is in France. We know that there are camps already in adjoining smaller cities, and we also know that there are unaccompanied minors, mostly from Afghanistan, who are basically sleeping around the train station in Paris, which gets you to Calais. So of course not everything will be all right. For instance, the Belgian authorities are afraid that some of the people will actually go to Belgium or try to get to even harbors in the Netherlands,
right,
not even Belgium. We won't solve the problem, but the problem actually now is still in the southern part of Europe, in places where the conditions are even more squalid, on the islands of Lesbos or in Italy, in the southern part of Italy.
Mr. Janning, what do you think? Is this going to solve the problem, or another problem going to pop up somewhere later, and sometimes later?
It could very well pop up at some other place, because the essential motivation is for these people stranded in Calais is to get to Britain. And that motivation doesn't end with the camp being dismantled. So you may expect that they will look for other ways to get to their target destination. In a way, it's also interesting to see that how the French respond to a problem, because France's own external borders are in the south of Italy, or in Greece for that matter, like all of the other Schengen countries. Here we see, on the issue of Calais, we see really the issue, as Virginie has been saying, we really see the issue that Europe faces at its southern periphery at this point.
Iain, what do you think? I mean, we understand Scotland Yard police have been in Calais in order to relate with your French counterparts. But once again, is it going to solve the problem for the UK? 35 minutes under tunnel movement only needed before they transfer themselves from France to your country.
Well, it certainly won't solve the problem for the UK, because the migrants, as Josef has just said, will continue to want to go to the UK. But we need to put this in a different perspective. The 10,000 or so would-be migrants in Calais are about 1% of just the Syrians now relocating into Europe. There's over 1 million Syrians displaced into Europe, and a further 4 million in neighbouring countries. So dealing with 10,000 really has virtually no impact on the demand, which is coming for as many as 5 million just Syrians, and that's before you start counting the Afghanis, the Eritreans and the other nationalities. There's a big Europe-wide problem, and this is a tiny part of it.
Okay, but for now, what's next? Virginie, we understand the French authorities have been dispersed these people, transfer them to different kinds of camps for transition, and then they're going to be settled down into different towns, places in France. According to some media reports, we have already heard from residents from those places, likely these people are likely to be settled down. And they are suggesting, they are afraid that their little town in tranquility going to be disturbed as a result, particularly the older generation. They don't know whether there's going to be safety and security guaranteed. Virginie, what do you make of it?
So just to pick up on what Iain said, by the way, most of the people, including most of the children, the unaccompanied minors, are actually not going to the UK. I think for about 500 have been identified by the French association in charge to go to the UK. The others, which about 700 of them, will actually go as the rest of the 9,000 indeed to sort of well, they're called welcoming camps, welcoming centers, sorry. And then not everybody will go into an asylum request. For instance, the minors will be taken care of by departments who are in charge of protecting minors in need. It's called the social aid to children. The others, some of them may get a student visa. Not all of them are going to go into the asylum process. But to answer your question, there is a particular context. As you know, we will have presidential elections next year, followed by parliamentary elections. And already we have primary candidates from the right who are running on a very populist anti-immigrant stance, including our former president, Nicolas Sarkozy. So the instrumentalization of this issue is actually mostly national. So it's, I know we talk a lot about this small, people from small villages who are worried. I think that it's a real issue in the sense that you cannot have 50 people arrive in a town that has 100 people. It has, but there's been much more solidarity than one can imagine at the local level, because you have mayors, even of small towns, who were willing to accept refugees. The question is, can these people, when they arrive in a small village in France, actually find a job?
Right.
They have no license. Some of them don't speak French. So even when you are solidaristic, the idea is still to see whether that will be the solution for these people, or whether they will think, I'm going back to Calais or wherever, and I'll still try to get to the UK.
Well, Joseph, I guess that is the question needs to be asked. So it's not just about the settlement, it's also about what's happening next to it. What's going to be their future? Do we have clear signs and signals about that?
I think,
let's go to Joseph.
We don't know really.
Sorry.
We don't know that really, Tian Wei. All societies receiving larger numbers of migrants can do is to try to prepare an environment that is conducive to integration. And I think a job is the pivotal issue there, but also being integrated in a social infrastructure, in neighborhood initiatives, in sports clubs, in all sorts of social activities that connect you with others in society. In Germany, we have this experience of being now in a position to, over a rather brief period of time, having to integrate and having to do this job for a rather large number of people. It's not easy, I can tell you that. It's not easy to get them into work. It's not easy to get them connected, but we have lots of encouraging signs from actually both larger cities and smaller cities. What you need, however, and that may be difficult in a small village, what you need, however, is sufficient job opportunities. Fortunately, in Germany at this point in time, there is plenty of availability of jobs, so it looks pretty good at this point.
Okay, for Germany, that is the way, but what about for France? Very briefly from you, Virginie, job opportunities, even for locals, easy to find. What about for these people?
France is not Germany, not just because it's not doing so well economically, but it's much more centralized. Our migrants are mostly in big cities, and job opportunities happen to be there. They don't go there by chance. One issue which has been solved in Germany is, and not in France, is the legal right to access the labor market when you are in an asylum procedure. Right. And that is really what we've been talking. I've been consulted by, the president, people everywhere in the government, and I keep telling them, these people need to have the right to work.
Okay.
This is the, and this really has to change.
Well, all of these chaotic situations
exactly
are
the reasons my colleague said.
Yeah. The chaotic situation evolving, even though we're trying to find solutions, but Iain, does it make the UK a little bit farther away from the problem? What can be the UK's contribution? I know you are not inviting the problem, but on the other hand, there is a problem, so everybody probably have to do their share.
Well, the UK very slowly is accepting its responsibility for some of the children in the Calais camps, especially where they have relatives located in the UK. It's been a very slow process, and paradoxically, the government is now coming under severe pressure for the slowness with which it's acted. So it's moving away from the discourse which said that Britain was hostile to migrants to one saying, surely Britain can do this little bit to help vulnerable children who are exposed to all the dangers of the Calais camps. Now there's then the bigger question for the UK that we have this big story around the referendum, Brexit, and the hostility overall to more people coming into the country. And that's a very long way from being solved.
Right.
So we really need to separate the short-term resolution of Calais from the longer-term difficulties of having a coherent migrant policy.
But the question, Iain, is will the current politics allow that to happen? Allow real discussions to happen, allow real policies to come up despite all of these heated debates. As Virginie also earlier mentioned, for her country, for your country, it's the same.
It is, but I think you should be aware of the numbers once again, that in the last year, something of the order of 300,000 people came net into the UK. So that means the gross flow was nearly 500,000 people coming in. So we are used to accepting migrants in the UK. It's just that the sheer number coming in has created growing hostility to still more. I think we need to separate that from the relatively straightforward problem of dealing with the Calais camp.
So may I have the same question for you as well? Virginie, you talk about your political cycle, of course, for next year. Now the question really is, when you have a situation like this, is this going to strengthen the kind of rhetoric coming from the current administration? Does this mean they have already solved the problem? What would this mean for the all political debate next year for your election? And how, under that circumstances, will these people be treated? Will the policy be the same or likely to change it once again dramatically?
Well, there's a huge stake for the government this week. And it has to show that it can manage the evacuation of the camps. But this is not the end of it. Of course, they will come under scrutiny from both sides, I would say. People more on the left who think that they're not doing enough. People on the right that say that they're going to be too lax. So we're going to have that debate. At the same time, they're basically waited until the end of the 5-year term of our president to really deal with the problem, which was probably not very smart. But the main issue is also how France was positioning themselves vis-à-vis the UK in renegotiating the agreement with the UK. But also France has to be much more proactive in the European context. But even in an electoral context, you see among the right-wing candidates that they're not all aligning on this very, very populist anti-immigrant movement. But the National Front, the extreme right-wing party, is extremely strong in the northern area of France where Calais is located, actually. And they, of course, will be, I think, the winners of the fact that the government has, for 19 years, that camp has been there. Right. And, for the last years with more people, and they haven't done anything. So, it's a question of both incompetence of the government that will be criticized, and of course, it is really a very poor, de-industrialized region in northern France, where the National Front is doing extremely well.
Well, Joseph, the thing is this the beginning of the solution for European continent to deal with the migrants or asylum seekers, or many of them coming from Syria, Afghanistan, and some of the other countries in trouble, Somalia, for example, Sudan? Or this is just a political gesture? Remember Sangate, there's another camp back in the year 2002. It dissolved, but then came another camp like this. So is this the beginning of the solution, or just one of those pages you always see?
No, it's one of those pages that you always see. If it was the beginning of the solution, then it would have to focus on the situation in Greece and in Italy. We would have to be, as Europe, become much more effective in receiving the people coming or reaching our soil, treating their claims, and then sending them on in the EU or sending them back home. We need to be much more forthcoming in terms of addressing the refugee issue at its sources or in the region. That is to massively engage in refugee camps in Turkey, in Lebanon, and in Jordan. And as we now start to do, also begin to become more sensitive to developments in sub-Saharan Africa in order to really address the issue. Everything else is a painting, is window dressing.
Window dressing, makeup only, Iain?
Yes, I agree with Josef on that, because if you look at the sheer numbers trying to cross the Mediterranean, the number of would-be migrants drowning in the Mediterranean Sea is similar to the number being shipped out of Calais. So that tells you just how small a contribution to the resolution of the overall problem this is. As I said before, 10,000 in Calais, 1 million Syrians alone. So that's 100 times the scale just of the Calais, just comparing with Syrians. And that's before you start counting the other nationalities you mentioned. It's a huge problem, and it's not just Europe's problem, because the displaced persons is a global problem which the international community, including China, seems to be unable to cope with.
Well, this is a very long story. We are only in the very beginning of a few pages. We'll see how the story would evolve over the time. But thank you so much for the three of you. Give us a very frank insight about the story itself and possibly its future. Iain Begg, Josef Janning, Virginie Guiraudon. I hope I pronounced your name right. Thank you so much for the three of you for being with us. Really appreciate it.